So here's my gripe with nonfiction self-help books. And it actually has very little to do with the self-help bit and the actual content of those books. And it's more about the structure and form of those books and what that form and structure of those books does to the human soul. And as someone who, it's my day job working for a church and a Christian school to think about what things do to people's souls, that leads me to say that I think a lot of Christians actually need to be reading more fiction, especially crazy long fantasy books. And if you're already wanting to navigate away or swipe away from this video, you're actually proving my point. Forgot my coffee. Because here's what I've noticed is that when I am reading a nonfiction book, I oftentimes have trouble reading it all the way to the bitter end, and I don't think it's my attention span because I can read really long fantasy trilogies, or what do you call it when there's five? Quintilogy? Quintet? But I've noticed that with a lot of nonfiction, the value proposition of the book is delivered in the introduction and usually the first 1 or 2 chapters. And then after that, it's like giving more examples and laying out different ways that that concept plays out, but they've already delivered on the whole purpose of the book. And so by chapter 9, chapter 10, you're like, yeah, I get the point. And so you just took that same concept and shifted it to family. Or you took the same concept and shifted it to your workspace if you're in the design phase of development. And I think you see the same thing play out when you watch videos like this one. When you do content creation stuff, you're coached to make sure that you hook people in the first 5 seconds because they're gonna leave. If you don't play the psychological games, to hook people so that they wanna stick around to the end of the video to change metrics, blah, 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 blah. But all of it's on making sure you capture people's attention right away, which means you need to deliver value right away, which means that a lot of the books that we're reading and a lot of the media that we are consuming is training our minds, training our souls to want to get that hit immediately, to want to have the goods delivered right on the spot. Which I get it. We live in an overwhelmingly busy society, and so you want to get the information, you want to get the payoff as quickly as you can so you can move on and continue to do your life stuff. However, I think that if you're trying to train yourself for, I don't know, let's think of fruits of the spirit, like self-control and patience. If you want to have the capacity to do spiritual disciplines like solitude and silence, if you want to be the type of person that can find peace in your everyday life, it requires a different type of mindset than get the payoff right away in the first 5 to 20 seconds. I think a chart is helpful sometimes. So this represents most of my experience with a lot of that self-help theological nonfiction stuff. The title, the introduction, the sleeve on the book, it gives all sorts of reward. Like, hey, it looks like this might be a unique concept. I don't know if this is pulling back the curtain too much, but there have been times that a title of a book and a 10-second explanation of the premise of the book from a friend has been enough to change my perspective on some things. But anyway, you pick up that book and you start reading it, and for the first few chapters, there's some reward, and as the repetition continues on, the reward reduces and reduces and reduces till you're reading through the last chapters of the book and you're like, yeah, I think I get the point. And this little bump here represents when you finally finish the book, because you get a little hey, I get bragging rights, I guess, for finishing this book. But you can see why prioritizing consuming media that does this to your brain trains you to think, okay, well, the payoff should be upfront, and there's no real point to continue persisting. And so while I see the value in the hook and I see the value in those self-help books that deliver right away on the promise, forgot to take a sip. French roast, a little too burnt. I think it behooves us as Christians to also cultivate the type of habits and the type of disposition that is willing to wait for the payoff. Man, if you've ever opened up the Bible, you know that sometimes you have to wait for the payoff. I mean, the book of Matthew opens with the genealogy, for goodness sake. They probably weren't trying to hook their audiences the same way. And so if we want to read the Bible well, if we want to grow virtue well, we need to grow the skill of delayed gratification and developing the skill of becoming comfortable and trusting the process to know that the payoff might come later, which is why I think we as Christians need to read more fiction. When I decided to make this video, I was going to make it about fantasy in particular because I think fantasy authors do this quite well, but I realized that might just be my own bias because that is my genre of choice. Authors like Brandon Sanderson or Susanna Clarke or James Islington. I've never heard it said out loud. Robin Hobb and her slew of trilogies. One of the things I've noticed every time I crack open a new series, a new author, there is often 100 to 200 pages where I am just trusting that this thing will pay off in the end. There is no clear indication that what I am reading and learning about the ska or the planet of Scadrial or the Fitz's capacity to talk to this dog. As you're reading and learning the lore and getting the character development and character background, it can feel like homework. It can feel like almost tedious at points where you're like, okay, this is a lot of lore. I find myself opening up back to the beginning of the book, or I'm on an e-reader, and so usually I'll like swipe to something I screenshotted and put in my photos just to refer to the map, because I'm like, wait, where is this place called Arrow again? Ancrath. Oh, that's over there in the east. That's right. But you're having to do work. You're having to exercise patience. You're having to hold concepts in tension. You're having to, more than anything, trust that this process is going to be rewarding in the end. And man, if you've ever read any of those authors, I mean, I guess even more mainstream, like the Harry Potter series, even though it's kind of like kids fantasy fiction, there's like major payoffs in the end of that series. The more you engage in the process of reading long fantasy books, the more you learn to trust that all of this hard work up front will pay off in the end, even if you don't know how or why, which is why I think we as followers of Jesus actually need, if you are a reader, which like with the whole reading the Bible thing, it's probably a good idea to be a reader. I think it's an important practice. And if you aren't a reader, I guess find a practice that has like some sort of analogous behavior to this. Because I found that when it comes to reading the Bible, when it comes to following Jesus, when it comes to spiritual disciplines, it more often than not follows this same pattern. There's 200 life pages of, is this doing anything? Is this going somewhere? Is there actually going to be a payoff for this? But the more you commit yourself to that process, the more time you spend, the more you realize that, man, at page 500, this thing goes off in a way that it would never have gone off in a nonfiction book where you got the thesis and the main payout on page 4. Back to the chart here. This is what we're talking about. In the beginning, there might be minimal to no payoff, but that long process of investing actually pays off, and it pays. Actually, this is a little inaccurate. That's a little more representative. And it pays off way more than the quick hit. I probably should have left a little more room at the top because I still feel like this doesn't do justice to the experiences that I've had where I put in the hard, long work of investing to get to that end. Whether we're talking about developing spiritual disciplines or cultivating practices that connect me more deeply with God, or if it's a 900-page historical fiction set in England in the 1800s. I think we need to invest more time doing this sort of thing and less time doing this sort of thing for the sake of our souls. There's plenty of good to be said about efficiency, but I think it is important for us as Jesus followers to also recognize the good and take the time to be patient and wait for a bigger payoff. It's great in the moment to have like a big emotional feeling at a worship service, but it's so much more deeply rewarding to know that you have overcome your old addictions and habits because of your long-term commitment to cultivating patience and self-control. It is cool to read a proverb that is only 2 lines and you instantly get what it means and there's a payoff and something applicable right away. But it's another thing to see the way that the big story of the Bible is all woven into these accounts of Jesus. The parallels between Jesus and Israelite history, the ways that he is walking out and fulfilling the law and the covenants and the prophets. And these are connections that you can't make unless you put in the hard work of reading the law and understanding the covenants and reading the prophets. So if you are a recreational reader outside of the Bible, pick up a fantasy book, because I think it'll change the way that you live your life and even the way that you read the Bible.